Hi there, Alex here at mixinglessons.com. In today's video, we're going to talk about the pros and the cons of mixing on headphones. You'll hear different advice from different people. Some people love mixing on headphones. Other people will say you can't really mix on headphones, you need to use monitor speakers. And so in this video, we'll look at some of the pros of mixing on headphones, some of the drawbacks, and then I'll give you some tips on how you can get the best results if you do mix on headphones. Before we dive in, if you make music in a home studio, then head over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads and download your free copy of my EQ cheat sheet, my compression cheat sheet, and my vocal recording guide. I think you'll find them really useful. As home studio users, mixing on headphones can be really useful to us, if not a bit of a necessity a lot of the time. As much as we'd all love soundproofed studios with perfect acoustic treatment, the reality is we might be mixing at home with other people living with us and we don't want to disturb them with our speakers all the time, or perhaps you do quite a lot of traveling, and in an instance like that, mixing on headphones is going to be really useful to you. So first and foremost, let's look at some of the pros of mixing on headphones. First and foremost, when we mix on headphones, the sound that we hear isn't coloured by the room that we're listening in. So when you listen to sound that's coming from speakers, from monitor speakers, you're not just hearing what comes out of the speakers, you're also hearing the sound of the room. And the room's acoustics can colour the sound. It's for that reason that we use acoustic treatment in studios. Now, of course, with headphones, that's not something that we need to worry about because the sound doesn't interact with the room. It goes directly into our ears. Another pro of working with headphones is that it gives us consistency and familiarity. So no matter where it is that you're mixing, the sound will always be pretty much the same. Whereas with speakers, if you are mixing in a different room, say you move house, or maybe you're doing some mixing at a friend's house, as much as you might know those monitor speakers very well, you don't necessarily know the room very well. Whereas with headphones, it's always going to sound pretty much the same, and familiarity and consistency are really important when you're mixing. You can put your headphones on and you know how you like music to sound in those headphones. And the third benefit to using headphones when you mix is that you can hear a lot more detail. So it's a lot easier to pick up on things that you might miss or not notice if you're using monitors. So I find that if there's a click or a pop or something that needs to be dealt with, I often won't notice it on speakers, but I will notice it when I listen on headphones. I also sometimes find that things like edit points are a lot more noticeable when I listen on headphones. And so that gives me an opportunity to notice those things and deal with them, whereas they might go unnoticed if I was just listening on monitors. So I think that those are the three main benefits to using headphones, but there are of course some drawbacks and some downsides to using headphones. So let's talk about those. The first drawback is that the stereo image is a little bit harder to judge, and so that can influence the panning that you apply to the mix a little bit. So very briefly, we perceive stereo in two ways. If we hear something more loudly in the right ear than we do in the left ear, then we know that that is on the right hand side of us. Also, if the sound reaches our right ear slightly earlier than it reaches our left ear, then we know that something is on the right hand side of us. And so that level difference and that arrival time difference are two things that our brain uses to perceive the location of a sound. Now, when you mix on speakers, you don't just hear sound coming from the right speaker in your right ear and from the left speaker in your left ear. You also hear sound coming from the right speaker in your left ear and the left speaker in your right ear. This is what's referred to as crossfeed. And so again, that arrival time difference is part of what we use to perceive the location of a sound. Whereas with headphones, we don't have that crossfeed. And so your brain is only using the level difference between the left and the right channel to perceive the location of things. It doesn't have the arrival time to inform it of the location as well. And you might have noticed this, when you listen on headphones, the sound sort of appears to be placed in a straight line running between your two ears, rather than emanating from in front of us in the way that we perceive sound when we listen on speakers. And a lot of people find that quite unnatural, and they find it difficult to make decisions on where to pan things when they listen to music in that way. And so I will give you a tip on how to deal with that a little bit later on, but firstly, let's look at a couple of the other drawbacks to using headphones. So the second drawback to headphones is that headphones generally don't provide a flat frequency response, and they're designed this way intentionally. Headphones will intentionally boost the low end, and that's done to compensate for the fact that you can't really feel the low end that you would when you were listening on monitor speakers. Similarly, headphones often roll off a bit of the high end. And this is done to compensate for the fact that we perceive an accentuated high end when we listen on headphones because the speakers are sitting so closely to our ears. Headphones are designed to sort of compensate for some of the differences between listening on speakers and listening on headphones. But because they don't have a flat frequency response, this might lead you to make slightly ill-informed EQ decisions. Now again, this is something that I'm going to give you a tip on how to work with shortly. And the final drawback with headphones is that I find that fatigue sets in a lot more quickly on headphones than it does with monitor speakers. So for me, my ears get tired a lot more quickly and my ability to make critical mixing decisions deteriorates faster than it would when I mix on monitor speakers. So I've got 3 tips to try and overcome these 3 negatives, these 3 drawbacks to mixing on headphones. So tip number 1, when you're mixing on headphones, mix at lower volumes than you probably would if you were working with monitor speakers. By mixing at a lower volume, you'll minimize how quickly fatigue sets in. So by turning your headphones down a little bit, your ability to make those critical mixing decisions doesn't deteriorate quite as quickly as it does if you listen at louder levels. And it's also important to be mindful of the level that you've got your headphones at anyway so that you don't cause hearing damage. Tip number 2 is to take regular breaks. Because fatigue can set in more quickly on headphones, it's important to take regular breaks, and you're probably going to want to take breaks more regularly than you would if you were mixing on monitor speakers. So my personal rule of thumb, if you like, is to take a break at least once every 30 minutes and just give myself a few minutes to sort of reset and give my ears a little bit of a rest. And then tip number 3 is if you want to do the bulk of the mixing on headphones, that's absolutely fine, but double check your stereo image and your frequency response on a pair of speakers. As I've mentioned, stereo image isn't represented in the same way on headphones as it is on speakers, and so panning decisions that you make on headphones won't necessarily translate very well to speakers or vice versa. And so I always like to check my stereo image on monitor speakers and headphones to make sure that I've sort of struck a balance between the two and made decisions that translates well for people who are listening to the music that I've mixed on headphones or on speakers. And the same goes for the frequency response. If I'm mixing on headphones, I like to at least double check the frequency response on a pair of speakers, and if I'm mixing on speakers, I like to double check the frequency response on a pair of headphones. Even if you've invested in a really, really good pair of headphones, they won't necessarily have a flat frequency response. So is the low end missing when I listen to the music on speakers because I was listening to it on headphones when I mixed it and those headphones were accentuating the low end and so I didn't put as much low end into the mix? Or is perhaps the high end of the mix too harsh on speakers because I was listening on headphones which had rolled off some of the high end? So I always like to tweak it so that I've got a mix that translates well across both. It sounds good on speakers and on headphones, and I've found the balance between the two. So this gives you an idea of some of the benefits to mixing on headphones, some of the drawbacks, and some of the things you can do to negate those drawbacks a little bit and still get really good mixes if you're doing the bulk of your mixing on headphones. I really, really like mixing on headphones, and I know a lot of people who get great mixes on headphones, so I'm certainly not somebody who believes that you can't mix on headphones. I think you can. I think there are just a few things that you have to do to get the best results, and a couple of things that you need to just double check on a pair of speakers after you've done the majority of your mixing on a pair of headphones. So I hope you found this useful. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments. Don't forget to head over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads for your free EQ cheat sheet, your free compression cheat sheet, and your free vocal recording guide. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel for future videos, and I'll see you next time.